Do you believe that the sound of a song may be the only thing between you and death? It sounds like something from a movie, but it happened. On a sultry March night in 1919 in New Orleans, a serial killer did something that seems impossible to believe. He wrote a letter, yes, a letter, addressed to the entire city, and in it, he warned, "Next Tuesday, I will pass through the city, and I will kill, but I'll save all the houses where I'm playing jazz." Yes, you got it right. A real killer in a real city, determining who lives and who dies, based on a soundtrack. This is the kind of story that makes us question everything we know about evil and about fear, because this is not an urban legend. It's not an internet theory. It is a documented case, creepy, no solution to this day. That night, thousands of people filled bars, turned on record players, put bands to play. The whole city has become a jazz stage, for fear of dying. And you know what's most disturbing? No one died that night. But in the weeks before, and in the months that followed, doors were broken into, bodies were found in pools of blood, and no one, not the police, not the journalists, not the residents themselves, could figure out who the monster behind it all was. What you will hear now is not just the story of a serial killer. It's a journey into a nightmare with a soundtrack, a forgotten chapter in American history where jazz became protection and silent, a death sentence. New Orleans, 1919. The city was a boiling cauldron of cultures, colors, sounds, and stories. But behind the music and the smell of food in the alleys, something dark moved. An ancient fear that took shape and earned a name. The Axeman. He didn't have a pattern. He killed men, women, children. He entered houses at night, breaking down doors or windows, and attacked with brutality. He always left an axe behind, sometimes from his own family, sometimes brought by him, but he never took anything. Nothing but the peace of those who survived. And the worst? He disappeared into thin air, like a ghost. The police were trying to find a logic. I tried to find connections, but all there was chaos, blood, and silence, until the letter arrived. A message written with almost theatrical coldness, signed as if it came from hell itself. And he said, with all his words, that he would walk the streets, invisible, on that Tuesday. And that it would only spare homes where there was music. Not just any music, but jazz. That was enough to paralyze an entire city. People who had never heard jazz bought records in a hurry. Bands were hired to play in the poorest blocks. Even churches improvised orchestras. The city has become a collective ritual of survival, jazz playing on every corner. And strangely, no attack that night. How to explain this? How to understand a killer who threatens an entire city? And does it fulfill its promise as if it were above the law, reason, reality itself? The Axeman disappeared after that, as if it had fulfilled its mission. But the trauma remained, and the question also, who was he? A psychopath with a sense of theatricality, an ancient spirit fueled by fear, a sick vigilante obsessed with music? Or are we facing something even darker, a kind of evil that is not content with just killing, but he wants to turn fear into a spectacle? This story was swept under the rug, transformed into an urban legend, ignored in official books. But it is real. It is registered. And to this day, no one has been able to name the killer. Now stop and think. How many other truths have been hidden because they seem too absurd to be accepted? If you're here, it's because you know the world is stranger, more dangerous, and more full of secrets than we've been told. And the story that begins now will show you exactly that. Because this is not just a case of murder. It is a ritual of fear, a sound that became salvation, and a killer who danced in the shadows as the city played to survive. It all started almost invisibly, like a whisper that refuses to turn into a scream. The first recorded attack did not draw as much attention from the local police. After all, violent crime back then wasn't exactly rare in New Orleans, but this one had something different. Something that, at first glance, seemed out of place, and that later would prove to be a chilling pattern. It was a sweltering dawn, the air impregnated with the smell of sweat, alcohol, and smoke. A couple was sleeping at home when suddenly, the back door was torn off, not opened, not broken into carefully, ripped off, as if someone, or something, wanted to make it clear that the entrance was not a request, it was a sentence. The attacker quietly entered, found the family's axe in the basement, and used it against them. The woman survived, but did not see anyone's face. She could only remember the sound, one step, then another, then silence. The police recorded it as an unsuccessful robbery. But something didn't make sense. Nothing was stolen. There were no signs of a dispute, and the axe was left on the ground, carefully cleaned. Days later, another attack, and then another, always at night, always in modest houses, families who lived in working-class neighborhoods, always with a violent entrance, and always with the axe, often from the house itself. It was as if the killer wanted to use what was familiar to destroy everything that was safe there, as if turning everyday life into a weapon was part of the ritual, part of the torture. As the weeks passed, the city sank into a feverish state of paranoia. Newspaper headlines began to use words like mysterious, diabolical, sadistic. People locked their doors with furniture, slept in groups, left lights on around the house. Families started to keep guns by their bedside. Some even organized neighborhood patrols with neighbors, as if the only way not to go crazy was to fight an enemy that no one could see. But it was no use. The Axeman, as he was dubbed by the media, seemed to be everywhere at once and nowhere. It left no fingerprints, there were no witnesses, no apparent motivation, only blood, terror, and silence, until he spoke. A letter, addressed to the city's newspaper, signed with the name Hell, arrived at the newsroom. Written in a sarcastic, almost theatrical tone, the text was a spectacle of sadism. The author claimed to be an entity from beyond, something that could not be stopped, a demonic spirit of heat and death. He mocked the police, laughed at panicked citizens, and said he would kill again. But there, in the middle of the letter, was the most bizarre part. He gave a warning, a specific date, Tuesday, March 19th. It's a challenge. He said that night, he would walk through the streets of the city, invisible to everyone, and kill anyone who was at home, unless he was listening to jazz. Yes, jazz. The most loved song by the beings of my kingdom, he says. And then, the absurdity happened. The whole city obeyed. On the appointed night, New Orleans turned into a carnival of panic and saxophones. Restaurants hired musicians in a hurry. Improvised bands played on balconies and sidewalks. People who had never heard jazz before clung to old records, radios, and phonographs. Some families have rented musicians to play in the living room of their home as a kind of sound amulet. Imagine this scene. Thousands of people, in nervous silence, listening to the sound of the trembling notes of a clarinet at the end of the street, as if each chord were a prayer, each melody a plea for mercy. It was as if the entire city had become hostage to an involuntary cult, a macabre ritual conducted not by a priest, but by a murderer. And that night, no one died, no attack, no casualties, no door broken in. The city woke up the next day in shock, relief mixed with an even deeper fear, because this was no coincidence. That wasn't luck. It was control. And that, more than any crime, was the real violence of the Axeman, total control. The absolute power to provoke panic on an urban scale, to transform music into protection and silence into threat. But what did he want? Was it just blood? Or was there something else? Something ritualistic, theatrical, symbolic? Some experts who analyzed the case decades later claim that the killer's behavior did not follow the classic pattern of psychopaths. There was intelligence, yes. There was, method. But there was also a kind of almost artistic signature, as if he didn't just want to kill. He wanted to score. He wanted to be remembered. And not because of his cruelty, but because of his invisible presence, because of his ability to take over an entire city without being seen. New Orleans, a city accustomed to the supernatural, to the rituals of voodoo, to ghosts in hotels and cemeteries that seemed to breathe history, suddenly found itself faced with something far more disturbing, an eye. Evil that used the city's own folklore to hide, an evil that spoke like a demon, killed like a man, and disappeared like a spirit. The following weeks were marked by extreme tension. Every noise on the sidewalk was a cause for warning. Each knock on the door, a possible harbinger of tragedy. And even after Axeman's disappearance, because yes, he stopped, the fear never went away. What he did was more than take lives. He snatched sleep from an entire city. He buried peace under the dissonant sound of out-of-tune instruments. It created a collective trauma that echoes to this day, drowned out by the soft chords of a city that keeps dancing not to remember. And if you think all of this is disturbing enough, wait until you find out what came next. Because the attacks have stopped, yes, but not the mystery, not the theories, not the secrets, and mainly, not fear. Because sometimes the scariest thing is not what the evil does, it's what he leaves when he leaves. The silence that followed the Axeman's disappearance did not bring peace. On the contrary, it brought even more questions, more unrest, more theories. Because when fear has no form, it turns into everything. And what happened in New Orleans at that time was not just a string of brutal crimes. It was an urban ritual, a social phenomenon, an echo of something bigger, something that seemed to surpass human logic. After the attack ceased, speculation began to spread like smoke through a city already saturated with tension, and it was not difficult to find those who believed that this murderer was not just a man. Some witnesses who swore they felt his presence, even though they had not seen him, said that there was something in the air, a sensation, a weight, as if fear had a body, as if evil had learned to walk among us. The theories multiplied. Some tried to find a logical, if absurd, explanation. There were those who said that Axeman was a frustrated musician, a rejected artist who went crazy, bankrupt pianist, perhaps, who channeled his hatred against a city that preferred other names, other melodies. He would be a macabre avenger, using music as a code of war, transforming jazz, a symbol of life, of expression, into a cry of death. Others bet on a more ritualistic line, a psychopath with occult tendencies, obsessed with sound patterns, who saw in jazz frequencies a kind of door between worlds. There are records of scholars of the time, including doctors and amateur researchers, who analyzed the letter left by him and found mystical patterns in the text. The choice of words, the rhythm of the sentences, the signature, hell, everything reminded us of ancient writings of possession and invocation, as if the text itself had been dictated by something that was not human. Now take a deep breath and think to myself, what if it wasn't? What if Axeman was never a person? What if it was, or still is, an entity, something old, forgotten, that awoke for some reason in New Orleans? And if jazz wasn't just a musical preference, but a requirement, an offering, a sound that somehow calmed him, distracted him, or worse, fed him? Darker theories suggest that jazz, that night, saved no one. It only satisfied a hunger, a collective and involuntary pact with an invisible force, the whole city playing for the same audience, something that no one saw, but everyone feared. A synchronized ritual, like a hastily cast urban spell. And the most disturbing thing is that this would not be new in New Orleans. The city has always lived between the real and the mythical, between the tangible and the spiritual. A land of saints and demons, of candles lit in cemeteries and skulls painted on ancient walls. Voodoo isn't just a cultural element there. It's a spiritual structure that shapes the relationship between life, death, and what exists in between. And within this context, the Axeman fits perfectly. As an avatar of collective fear, a specter of steel and silence that only appeared when the city slept, an inverted vigilante who did not demand order, but chaos. Some say that Axeman is still around, that he was never caught because he can't be, that he does not walk among us like an ordinary murderer, but like a whisper in the alleys, a dissonant rhythm that escapes from a closed basement, an old record that begins to play on its own. And by the time someone hears it, it's too late. Interestingly, after the famous letter, other cities began to report similar murders, cold cases that, at the time, did not attract attention, but that today, analyzed with the right eyes, have unsettling similarities: axes, absence of theft, attacked victims sleeping, and, in some of them, references to sound. In Chicago, for example, a series of crimes in the 1920s involved victims found with torn sheet music beside their bodies. In Memphis, a witness claimed to have heard jazz coming from the victim's home, where no one had lived for months. Coincidences? Perhaps. But when fear spreads, he clings to everything he can. And the letter, that damn letter, it is still the central point of this whole mystery. The theatrical tone, the demonic arrogance, the absurd promise fulfilled with precision. Who writes something like that? Whoever challenges an entire city manipulates an entire population. The style of the letter, according to an occult scholar, was not only theatrical, it was symbolic. It carried elements of summoning, typical descriptions of demonic manifestations, references to eternal warmth, to the delight of seeing human suffering, to invisible omnipresence. All of these appear in ancient grimoires and manuscripts linked to necromancy and spiritual invocations. We are not talking about a simple murderer with delusions of grandeur. We are talking about a possible manifestation of the archetype of fear, a being or force that understood how to manipulate collective terror to exist. And that brings us to a question that needs to be asked. What exactly happened that night? Did jazz save it? Did jazz sacrifice? Did jazz feed it? Think with me. Why has no one ever been arrested? Why are there no reliable witnesses? Why does the whole town remember the name Axeman, but no one has ever been able to describe it? Did he never have a face? Did he manifest himself only when the city was terrified enough to give shape to him? What if he comes back? These questions remain, vibrating in the depths of the collective consciousness like a grave note that never dissipates. Jazz has become an amulet. It became a memory, but it also turned into fear, a symbol of a night where music was more than art. It was survival. Today, many treat this story as an urban legend, something to tell in horror podcasts, dark documentaries, or videos like this. But those who know the city, who walked through its alleys, anyone who has smelled the old rust mixed with the mold of the basements, knows that there is something there, something that still moves, something that does not want to be forgotten. Maybe that's why you're still here, watching, because you feel it, because you know this isn't just an old story. It is a warning. And if you feel the same, I want you to comment now down here. The sound is still alive. Or better yet, Jazz doesn't save, he invokes. Choose one of these phrases and leave it in the comments so I know that you are with us on this journey of true stories, unsolved mysteries and crimes that challenge everything that is rational. And if you have a theory, if you think Axeman was a spirit, a ritualist, a crazy musician, or something even more bizarre, write it down. Tell me what you believe. I want to see how far your imagination goes, because the next part of the story goes even deeper. And what comes now could change everything you thought you knew about this case. Because sometimes, the most dangerous thing is not that which comes with blood. It's the one who arrives dancing. But even after so long, something remains. The city moved on, of course. Music has become just music again. Jazz has regained its lightness, its swing, its role as a soundtrack to the hot and humid streets of New Orleans. Bars reopened, parties continued, and phonographs resumed playing for pleasure, not fear. But if you talk to the oldest residents, if you pay attention to the whispers between the alleys, to the stories that don't become a book or a headline, you'll realize that no one has really forgotten what happened. Nobody, because the sound may have stopped, but the fear remained, like a buzz in the background of the city's collective memory, an invisible scar that pulsates from time to time, especially when the night is very quiet. Axeman was never caught, nor suspects, nor prisons. He simply disappeared. He escaped from an entire city that was looking for him with wide eyes and trembling hands. And this silence, this complete disappearance, is perhaps the most frightening of all, because the fear of the unknown is worse than any monster revealed. The absence of answers creates space for something even more powerful: psychological terror. The feeling that the danger is not over, that at any moment the sound of footsteps can return, and that it, or that, may be closer than we imagine. Some believe that the Axeman died shortly afterwards. Maybe he was just an ordinary psychopath, consumed by his own insanity. Others, the most skeptical, believe that he simply moved to another city and resumed his crimes elsewhere, under another name, with another style. There are even records in nearby cities, a few years later, of attacks with a similar modus operandi: silent break-in, night attacks, nothing stolen, victims sleeping, axes. But the most sensitive, the most attentive to what is beyond the surface, believe in something else. They believe that the Axeman was not a man, that he never had to run away, because he was never really here, that he was a form, a symbol, a fragment of fear that came to life in that city, at that time, fueled by collective panic, by sound and silence, by blood and belief, and when he was satisfied, disappeared, not out of weakness, but because it fulfilled its role, and it's just waiting for the next opportunity. Maybe you think that's an exaggeration, perhaps, but I want you to think of something. Why do stories like this continue to haunt us? Why, even after 100 years, we are still here, trying to understand, investigating, counting? It is because there is something within us, something ancestral, that recognizes certain kinds of evil. Who knows when something is different? When a story is not just another urban tragedy, but a warning. Because the truth is that Axeman didn't just leave victims. He left a question that echoes to this day, even between smiles in a bar, even when the music plays loudly, even when the city seems safe. If sound can save lives, what happens when silence is deadly? I know, you felt it. And if you've made it this far in this video, it's because this story crossed you in some way. Because this is more than an old crime. It's a reminder, a mirror, a shadow that still observes us through the cracks of reality. And most importantly, it's a true story. No exaggeration, no embellishments, only the facts that no one could explain. Now, I have a request for you. If this story involved you, gave you goosebumps, made you feel that chill down your spine that only the most disturbing mysteries cause. So prove that you've been with me this far. Leave it in the comments now. Jazz saved me. Write that, word for word, because it shows that you understand, that you have caught the sound behind the silence. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, this is the time. Here, we don't tell ordinary stories. We investigate what was swept under the rug. We relive the fears that no one wants to face. We dive deep into true horror stories, unsolved mysteries, and supernatural crimes that seem like legend, but they are frighteningly true. Sign up now. Turn on notifications. Because the next case I'm going to tell you, it will make you think twice before turning off the light. And if this video took you by surprise, it held you until the end, leave a like. But it's not just any like. It is the like of those who understand that fear is also information. Of those who know that some stories, no matter how disturbing they may be, need to be told. And before leaving, take a look at the next video that is appearing on the screen. He brings another case as bizarre as this one, a real disappearance that defies all logic. You will understand why this channel is called True Fear Files. Now tell me, is sound still alive?